The Souls-like franchise by From Software has changed quite a lot over the years. As someone whose first entry into the series was Dark Souls 1, in a lot of ways it's been really nice to see some of the improvements each iteration brings. Sure, the overall structure and challenge has remained, with blisteringly difficult boss fights and somber cryptic theming, but quality of life adjustments were always welcome along the way. Dark Souls 2 let you fast travel from any bonfire location, Dark Souls 3 added rest stops after every boss fight, and Bloodborne had clever shortcuts all over the place to make traversal easier. By the time you got to Elden Ring, there's sights of grace around every corner, spirit ashes make battles more manageable than ever, and the open world structure turns bashing your head against a wall into purely a self-inflicted punishment, because you can always just go somewhere else if you get stuck. It's changed identity so much that it makes me ask myself, if I played Dark Souls 1 for the first time today, would I even like it at all? Or would the now obvious sore spots be too punishing to ignore? Some of these boss runbacks are downright diabolical. If you died to the Tauros Demon, Quelaag, Seethe, or Bed of Chaos, you were spending ridiculous amounts of time just wandering back to try and fight them again, not to mention all the tedious obstacles along the way. No fast travel until you beat Ornstein and Smough means you have to hightail it on foot to go anywhere new. I mean, do you remember the humanity counter in the top left corner? The thing that was never really explained and I still can't exactly tell you what it does to this day? Why is this here? To say Dark Souls had rough edges is the understatement of the century, but I think an important question to ask is what's lost when those edges are sanded away? Sure, Elden Ring has a dedicated jump button and a magical horse that can even double jump, but what do you gain by having to use a purposefully obtuse control scheme to try and clear this gap? I know at least for me, it creates a completely different atmosphere and design philosophy for the player. One that at first feels like punishment and demoralization, but as you learn to play by their rules and adjust your tempo accordingly, it teaches you perseverance and most of all, patience. You're not going to beat the bell gargoyles by brute forcing your way through like you would with any other game. You need to be tactical and aware of your surroundings. Because if you lose, you have to climb all the way back up here again and fight this frickin' room of hollows and channelers again. There's something at stake here. You can't just let the jelly summon take care of business and try again from right outside the door. Your options are limited and you are weak, but that only makes the amount of satisfaction skyrocket when you finally prevail. I'll be the first to admit that nostalgia is likely at play here. I've heard that the first Souls game you play is always going to be your favorite, and anecdotally I've seen that to be true with friends, where if they go back to an earlier entry, it's grating trying to tolerate a less refined experience. Yet I can't help but feel like something is missing in today's From Software titles, more focused on the spectacle and continuing to raise the stakes, rather than deliberate, some would say evil, design choices. Overall, this can probably be attributed to the series becoming more boss-centric rather than level-centric, and I think I just missed that original approach. Luckily, there is one game that has continued to carry that OG Dark Souls torch. Welcome to another episode of Good Game Design. Let me tell you about a little game called Silksong. Now, obviously, Hollow Knight is held by most as a modern masterpiece, and the anticipation for this long-awaited sequel was off the charts. But I think all of that time spent waiting has made people forget exactly how punishing Hollow Knight actually was, at least based on the initial reactions from players. Luckily, right from the get-go, Silksong lets you know the tone of what this adventure is going to be like, because after platforming your way up and reaching the first town of Bone Bottom, this happens. No apologies, no mercy. Team Cherry isn't going to hold your hand through this one. There are numerous things that reminded me of Dark Souls as I began playing. Oppressive traps, dark locales, unforgiving enemies. But what intrigued me the most near the beginning was the return of those boss runbacks. A few hours in, I'd explored and found around 3 different bosses that I could rotate between if I got stuck. But each one had a substantial amount of backtracking to reach when I died. And if I'm being honest, in a post-Elden Ring world in 2025, this was really annoying. I'd become so spoiled by recent games that it just felt like a big waste of time without any benefit. But similar to Dark Souls, this is teaching the player about pacing. Derek Yu had a great tweet about how runbacks can actually let the player breathe, reflect, and regroup before facing off again. And even though this was subconscious and I didn't clock it at first, this is exactly what I was doing. Okay, in the second phase, he shoots 2 of these things, not just 1, so make sure to hang a little longer in the air to avoid it, and keep your distance so when he telegraphs this attack, I have time to react. When you just go right back into the action immediately after a frustrating death, you have way less time to strategize and will likely die again more often. And you know what? These runbacks really aren't even that long. It's like a minute tops, but it feels so long because of how instantly gratifying every other thing we experience in our daily lives is, especially in the games we play. Silksong takes a step back and is telling you to be intentional and savor every moment. It's not about hastily getting to the next set piece. Learn the boss in and out so you can truly conquer it and appreciate what you just accomplished. Take your time, what's the rush? So once I settled into the type of game that I was in for, the similarities to Dark Souls only became that much more apparent. The land of Farloom is ruthless, everything is either dead or dying, there's danger lurking around every corner, and if you're barely surviving in the long stretches between benches, all you have for a saving grace is the super rare spool of silk to give you a tiny bit of hope, even though it basically doesn't make any difference. Everything comes at a cost. In order to see yourself on the map screen, it takes up one of your precious crest slots. This rosary machine asks for 80 beads and simply spits back out 60. I know there's obviously utility for this in the late game, but early on, moments like this felt downright brutal. But there's a large air of mystery to this game as well. Deep lore is hidden in all of the item descriptions. You're not exactly sure what half of the stuff even does at first. And man, it feels like there are so many hidden pathways, you basically need to run into every wall or ceiling just to make sure you're not missing something vital. Which felt just like slashing everything I could in Dark Souls in hopes of finding those unmarked illusory walls. And then I got to Biowater. I mean, even just from the name, you know this is Silksong's Blight Town. This place sucks, there's no other way to describe it. It's hard to see, enemies jump out of nowhere, there's traps galore, and the frickin' maggot water slowly sucks away your silk, removing the ability to heal just to add insult to injury. This was where Silksong felt the most like Dark Souls to me. The dread of stumbling through an unknown area, trying desperately to find any semblance of safety. Dark Souls usually achieves this through its hazards and enemy design, but Silksong throws another wrench into this by how it handles the map system. When you enter a new area, you're flying completely blind until you find chakra to get a copy of the area's layout, but even then you need enough rosaries to be able to afford it. So the combination of getting lost with foreign threats that behave in a way you don't understand yet makes for a truly harrowing experience. Biowater even has the most disheartening troll in the entire game, where after what seems like an eternity you finally find a bench, but instead of providing a much needed break, it shatters and sends you down below straight into a pool of muck. Like, come on, Team Cherry, that one's just cruel. But again, this made me reflect. Why did both Dark Souls and Silksong include these areas at all? If they're universally hated, why not scale it back a little? Well, I think it serves to heighten what's already been laid out before. The other areas in Farloom have been tough but manageable. Hunter's March introduces some hard-hitting enemies, Wormways is dark and claustrophobic, and Deep Docks has environmental hazards. But Biowater combines all of these together, in a too focused on if we could, didn't stop to think if we should type of situation. Plus, this area is directly attached to Sinner's Road, which is already a step up in difficulty and sparse in the relief department, so hitting these back to back made me seriously consider turning around and coming back later. I mean, they do warn you with the dead body and collapsing platform on the first screen, just so you know what you're in for. Having Biowater near the middle of the adventure and tucked away off to the side lets you dip your toe into harder waters while technically being optional, and provides some variety in the highs and lows of the game's challenge. Having a difficulty curve that looks like this instead of a traditional one makes it feel like you never know what's coming next, and also helps push you forward by saying, well, I guess I'll go check out the Underworks because at least it's not Biowater. It's worth noting that some of this stuff is nothing new for the Hollow Knight series. I mean, the original had Deep Nest after all. But when that game came out, the newest Souls title was Dark Souls 3. So to see such a return to form 8 years later after so many advances in FromSoft games today, things just hit differently, you know? It does remind me how good Hollow Knight was back then, but it feels like things are elevated even further this time around. The bosses, for example, translate really well as Souls-like encounters, which is really hard to do in a 2D space. I never really understood the discourse around difficulty with this game because I feel like all the bosses were well paced, and I didn't really struggle with very many of them until the endgame. The Last Judge feels like a perfect cap to Act 1 with multiple phases to master and great variety without feeling overwhelming. One area Hollow Knight always succeeded at was prioritizing platforming just as much as combat. So some of these encounters put both skills to the test at the same time, and that really helped keep everything fresh. The Cogwork Dancers was my favorite set of bosses though for a few reasons. First off, it's a perfect example of easy to learn, tough to master. All their moves are easily telegraphed with these white lines showing where they'll move next, but as you continue they become off sync and you need to think about two different patterns at once, as they speed up and become less and less predictable. But it also has beautiful environmental storytelling after you defeat one of them, by having the last remaining dancer finish the fight alone until you put it out of its misery. Extremely reminiscent of the Sif fight from Dark Souls 1. Without saying a word, you feel so much more emotion for their backstory, and even hesitate finishing the job. Great stuff. But what truly blew me away is that in some aspects, Silksong took the Souls DNA even further than we've ever seen before. Dark Souls was notorious for its hidden content behind cryptic clues, like waiting in this bird nest for 30 seconds to re-enter the undead asylum, or taking a random doll to a painting to open an entirely new area. Silksong took that inspiration and said, what if we bury an entire third act behind this type of thing? So not only do you need to figure out the convoluted set of requirements to unlock the secret ending, but it ends up sending you into an extra 1/3 of the game. Now, same question as before. Why would you do this as a developer? Why lock so much material that obviously took a ton of time and passion to create behind these obtuse barriers that a huge chunk of your audience is potentially never going to see? Some would say it's to reward those that truly seek it out, the most dedicated players. But I actually think it's deeper than that. I think its true purpose is to bring the community together. There are things in both of these games that no one in their right mind would be able to figure out on their own. And I think part of the beauty is that it takes committed fans working together to unlock all of the mysteries. So instead of being small Easter eggs or side content, it's now expected that this collaboration will take place. And for those that just can't get enough and want to see the true ending, they need to seek these tools out. It feels like the final evolution of this formula, while also somehow a return to its roots. In the end, I 100% completed Hollow Knight Silksong, and I can confidently say there are many reasons to love this game. From the homages to the original title like the delicate courier missions, or multi-wave Colosseum-like challenges, to the way it felt so fresh simply by having a new moveset, to the seemingly endless amount of things you can do beyond that 100% threshold. There's truly a vast sea of content here that all somehow lives up to the impossible amount of hype from before the game's release. But at least for me, what stuck out the most was its unwavering commitment to that original Dark Souls tone and atmosphere, even if that meant it would ruffle a few feathers along the way. And I can only hope more titles like this won't be afraid to continue that legacy in the future. Thanks for watching another episode of Good Game Design. I'll see you next time. Stay frosty, my friends.